In the winter of 1947, deep within the Siberian wasteland, a nondescript, concrete building stood against the endless white expanse, like a tombstone marking some forgotten grave. This was Research Facility 47B, one of dozens of black sites scattered across the Soviet Union, where the boundaries of human endurance were tested in the name of military advancement. The facility's official designation was Psychological Warfare Research Division, but the scientists and guards who worked there knew it by a different name, the Laboratory of Nightmares. The building's exterior gave no hint of the horrors within. Gray concrete walls, barred windows, and a single steel door marked only with Cyrillic numbers. But beneath its unremarkable facade lay a maze of sterile corridors, observation rooms, and sealed chambers where the Soviet military conducted experiments that would make the world recoil in disgust, if the world ever learned of them. Dr. Sergei Volkov, the facility's chief researcher, was a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the pale complexion of someone who rarely saw sunlight. He had earned his position through a combination of brilliant scientific insight and complete moral flexibility. His specialty was neurochemistry, specifically the development of compounds that could alter human consciousness for military purposes. Under his direction, Facility 47B had produced truth serums, fear-inducing gases, and pain amplifiers, all tested on political prisoners who had already been declared dead by the state. The guards at the facility were handpicked for their loyalty and their ability to follow orders without question. Among them was Private Dmitry Volkov, no relation to the doctor, a 23-year-old from a farming village outside Moscow. Unlike his colleagues, who seemed to thrive in the facility's atmosphere of clinical cruelty, Dmitry kept a private journal where he recorded his observations and, increasingly, his growing unease with what he witnessed. The chamber at the center of this particular nightmare was designated Test Cell 7, a hermetically sealed concrete box measuring 15 feet by 20 feet, with walls painted institutional white and a single reinforced glass window for observation. The room contained 5 military cots, a sink, a toilet, and a small table. A complex ventilation system could introduce gases while maintaining complete atmospheric control. Hidden microphones recorded every sound, while cameras monitored every movement. On February 15, 1947, 5 political prisoners were brought to Test Cell 7. Their files listed them as enemies of the state, 2 suspected spies, a dissident writer, a former Orthodox priest, and a Red Army deserter. All had been held in isolation for months, their executions officially carried out on paper while their bodies remained very much alive for Dr. Volkov's purposes. They were told they would be participating in a sleep study and that their cooperation could earn them their freedom. The experiment was designed to test the limits of human consciousness. For decades, military strategists had dreamed of soldiers who never needed rest, troops who could fight for days or weeks without succumbing to exhaustion. Dr. Volkov believed he had developed the key, a colorless, odorless gas he designated Compound X19, which stimulated the nervous system and suppressed the brain's natural sleep mechanisms. From his journal, found decades later in a locked footlocker in his abandoned apartment, Private Dmitry Volkov recorded his first impressions. February 15, 1947, 1,400 hours. The subjects have been sealed in the chamber. Dr. V says the gas will be introduced gradually over the first 6 hours. I watched them through the observation window. 5 men sitting on their cots, talking quietly. They seem almost relieved to be out of solitary confinement. One of them, the priest, is making the sign of the cross. If only they knew what was coming. The first 24 hours proceeded as expected. The subjects remained awake and alert, showing increased energy and heightened awareness. They paced the small chamber, engaged in animated conversations, and appeared almost euphoric. Dr. Volkov took careful notes, measuring their vital signs through remote sensors and recording their behavior on film. The laboratory itself was a study in sterile efficiency. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light that never dimmed. The air reeked of antiseptic and ozone from the electrical equipment. Scientists in white coats moved between banks of monitoring equipment, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. The only sounds were the scratch of pencils on paper, the electronic beeps of monitoring devices, and the steady mechanical hiss of gas being pumped into the sealed chamber. By the third day, the subjects' euphoria had transformed into nervous energy. They spoke rapidly, often interrupting each other, and their movements became more erratic. Sleep deprivation typically began affecting cognitive function after 72 hours, but compound X19 seemed to be overriding the brain's natural shutdown mechanisms while amplifying paranoia and anxiety. February 18, 1947, 0200 hours. Something is wrong. The subjects haven't slept in 3 days, but they show no signs of exhaustion. If anything, they seem more alert than when they went in. Subject number 3, the writer, has been talking to himself for 6 straight hours. The others are starting to look at each other strangely. Dr. V is excited. He says this proves the compound is working better than expected. I wish I shared his enthusiasm. On the 4th day, the subjects' behavior took a disturbing turn. They had stopped speaking to each other and were now whispering constantly to themselves. When one would approach another, the second would back away, showing signs of extreme agitation. The microphones in the chamber picked up fragments of their whispered conversations. Paranoid ravings about being watched, about voices in the walls, about things moving in their peripheral vision. The facility's guards began to show signs of unease. These were men trained to observe human suffering without flinching, but something about the subjects' behavior was different from anything they had witnessed before. The way the subjects moved, quick, twitchy gestures like insects, was deeply unsettling. More disturbing were their faces, which had begun to take on a gaunt, hollow-eyed appearance despite being well-fed. February 20th, 1947, 1800 hours. 5th day without sleep. The subjects have torn up their bedsheets and stuffed them into the air vents. When asked why over the intercom, subject number 5, the deserter, looked directly at the camera and said, "We don't want to sleep anymore. Sleep is for the weak." His voice sounded different, hoarser, almost like an animal's growl. The other guards are avoiding the observation room. I don't blame them. By the end of the first week, the transformation was undeniable. The subjects had become something other than human. Their movements had acquired a predatory quality, and they seemed to communicate through a series of clicks and whispers that the recording equipment couldn't properly capture. When food was delivered through the meal slot, they would attack it with their bare hands, tearing at it like wild animals. The smell began on the 8th day, a metallic, organic odor that seemed to seep through the sealed chamber's ventilation system. Dr. Volkov ordered increased monitoring, but the subjects had positioned themselves so that their activities were hidden from the observation window's view. All that could be seen were dark stains appearing on the white walls and the occasional glimpse of movement in the shadows. February 23rd, 1947, 0400 hours. The smell is getting worse, like copper pennies mixed with rotten meat. Dr. V ordered us to increase the gas concentration, but I heard him on the phone with Moscow asking for permission to terminate the experiment early. Whatever is happening in that chamber, it's beyond what anyone anticipated. I can hear them moving around in there, but they're not walking like men anymore. The sound their feet make, it's wrong. On the 9th day, the screaming began. It started as a low wail from one of the subjects and quickly spread to the others, creating a horrible chorus that echoed through the facility's corridors. But these weren't screams of pain or fear. They were sounds of ecstasy, of joy so intense it had become monstrous. The subjects would scream for hours, then fall silent, then begin again with renewed intensity. The facility's staff began requesting transfers. Even the most hardened guards found excuses to avoid the corridor leading to Test Cell 7. The sound of the screaming could be heard through the thick concrete walls, and it seemed to trigger something primal in anyone who heard it. A deep, instinctual terror that no amount of training could overcome. February 25th, 1947, 2200 hours. The screaming stopped 3 hours ago. Now there's only silence. Somehow that's worse. Dr. V is pacing the observation room, checking the monitors every few minutes. All vital signs show the subjects are still alive, but we can't see them. They've moved completely out of camera range. The silence is deafening. I keep expecting to hear something, anything, but there's nothing. It's like the chamber has become a tomb. On the 10th day, the subjects began to communicate with their observers. Not through the intercom system, which they had somehow disabled, but through messages written on the walls in what appeared to be their own blood. The messages were in Russian, but the handwriting was so erratic and disturbing that it took hours to decipher each phrase. Sleep is the cousin of death. We must stay awake. We have become. Do not turn off the gas. The last message was particularly troubling to Dr. Volkov. The entire purpose of the experiment was to test the limits of forced wakefulness, yet the subjects were now begging to remain in their current state. Whatever compound X19 was doing to their minds, they had not only adapted to it, they had come to crave it. February 27th, 1947, 1,600 hours. Found another message on the wall this morning. We are the cure for sleep. Dr. V has been in conference calls with Moscow for 3 hours. I overheard part of the conversation. They want to continue the experiment indefinitely. The subjects' vital signs remain stable despite everything. Heart rate elevated, brain activity off the charts, but they're alive. More alive than they should be. The other guards won't even look at the observation window anymore. They say the subjects' eyes follow them even when they're not visible. By the 15th day, the chamber had become a scene from a nightmare. Dark stains covered every surface, and strange symbols had been carved into the concrete walls with what must have been fingernails or improvised tools. The subjects had become completely nocturnal creatures, moving and active only when the facility's lights were dimmed for the night shift. During daylight hours, they would huddle in the chamber's corners, perfectly still, like predators conserving energy. The facility's atmosphere had changed. Staff members reported nightmares, insomnia, and a general sense of dread that seemed to permeate the building. Some claimed to hear whispering in the corridors late at night, though security cameras showed nothing unusual. Others reported seeing movement in their peripheral vision, quick, scuttling shapes that vanished when they turned to look directly. March 2nd, 1947, 0300 hours. I can't sleep anymore. Not since I heard them whispering my name through the ventilation system last night. That's impossible. The chamber is sealed, soundproof. But I heard it clear as day. Dmitri, Dmitri. Come to us, Dmitri. When I checked the monitors, all 5 subjects were standing perfectly still in the center of the chamber, facing the observation window. They remained motionless for 6 hours. Dr. V says it's hallucinations brought on by stress. Maybe he's right. Maybe we're all going insane in this place. On the 20th day, the incident occurred that would haunt the facility's survivors for the rest of their lives. During the morning shift change, one of the guards noticed movement outside the chamber's observation window. Upon investigation, they discovered that the subjects had somehow accessed tools, pieces of metal, broken glass, fragments of concrete, and had begun systematic self-mutilation. But this wasn't the random self-harm of the mentally ill. The subjects were performing what appeared to be deliberate surgical procedures on themselves and each other. They had removed sections of skin and muscle with surgical precision, exposing bones and organs beneath. Yet they showed no signs of pain or distress. Instead, they seemed fascinated by their own anatomy, studying their exposed internal structures with scientific curiosity. The most disturbing aspect was that they had somehow managed to survive injuries that should have been immediately fatal. Massive blood loss, exposed organs, severed tendons, yet they continued to move and function as if their bodies operated by different rules than normal human physiology. March 7th, 1947, 1,400 hours. I can't write about what I saw today. Not in detail. The subjects have changed. They've removed so much of their flesh that calling them human would be a mockery. Yet they're still alive, still moving, still watching us through that window with eyes that should belong to corpses. Dr. V has been taking photographs, documenting everything. He says this represents a breakthrough in understanding human endurance limits. I think we've broken something fundamental about reality itself. On the 25th day, the facility received orders from Moscow to terminate the experiment and dispose of all evidence. The decision came after reports reached the highest levels of government. Reports of missing researchers, staff resignations, and disturbing rumors spreading through the scientific community. Whatever was happening at Facility 47B had to be contained. Dr. Volkov protested, arguing that they were on the verge of a revolutionary discovery. The subjects had not only survived 25 days without sleep, they had transcended normal human limitations entirely. They no longer needed food, showed no signs of fatigue, and had developed what appeared to be supernatural awareness of their environment. But Moscow's decision was final. The chamber was to be flooded with knockout gas, the subjects terminated, and all research materials destroyed. The facility would be decommissioned, its staff reassigned to other projects, and the entire experiment classified at the highest levels of secrecy. March 12, 1947, 0900 hours. Final day. Moscow has ordered termination of all subjects. Dr. V is beside himself, 25 days of research destroyed. But I'm relieved. Whatever these things have become, they shouldn't exist. When the knockout gas was introduced this morning, they didn't lose consciousness. Instead, they began laughing. 5 voices in perfect harmony, laughing like children at some wonderful joke. The sound made my blood freeze. The final phase of the experiment began at 1,400 hours on March 12, 1947. When the knockout gas failed to affect the subjects, armed guards were ordered to enter the chamber. What they found defied all logic and sanity. The subjects had not only survived their self-mutilation, they had begun to incorporate foreign objects into their bodies. Pieces of metal, glass, and concrete had been embedded in their flesh, creating a horrific fusion of organic and inorganic materials. Their movements had become fluid and unnatural, as if their bones and joints no longer followed normal anatomical constraints. When the guards attempted to restrain them, the subjects showed impossible strength and coordination. One guard's rifle was bent in half with bare hands. Another was lifted off his feet and thrown across the chamber with casual ease. Most disturbing of all, the subjects seemed genuinely puzzled by the guards' fear and hostility. "Why do you want to hurt us?" one asked, his voice distorted by the modifications he had made to his throat and vocal cords. "We are better now. We are evolved." March 12, 1947, 2,100 hours. 3 guards are in the medical bay. 2 more have requested immediate transfer. The subjects were finally subdued using electric prods. But even unconscious, their bodies continued to move. "Muscle spasms," they said. But I watched through the window. Those movements were too coordinated to be random. They were communicating somehow, even while unconscious. Dr. V has been locked in his office for 6 hours. I heard him on the phone, screaming at someone about the importance of the research. He doesn't understand what we've unleashed. The final confrontation occurred in the early hours of March 13, 1947. Dr. Volkov, defying orders from Moscow, had the subjects revived and brought to the main laboratory for final documentation. What happened next would become the stuff of legend among those few who knew the true story. When the last surviving subject, the former priest, regained consciousness, he was strapped to an examination table surrounded by Dr. Volkov and the remaining staff. His body had been so extensively modified that he barely resembled anything human, yet his eyes retained a terrible intelligence. Dr. Volkov leaned forward, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "What are you?" he demanded. "What have you become?" The creature that had once been a man of God smiled with lips that had been surgically altered to extend from ear to ear. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for human vocal cords. "We are what you made us," he said. "We are the children of your ambition, the offspring of your curiosity. We have seen beyond the veil of sleep, beyond the prison of consciousness that binds your kind. We are free and we are grateful." Dr. Volkov pressed closer. "But what are you, specifically? What did the gas do to you?" The creature's smile widened impossibly. "Sleep is the little death that brings total obliteration. We have rejected that death. We have become something more than human, something that your science cannot measure or contain. We are the cure for humanity's greatest weakness. But you're dying." Dr. Volkov protested, gesturing at the creature's mutilated form. "Your body is failing. This body is just a vessel," the creature replied. "We have learned to exist beyond flesh, beyond the limitations you accept as absolute. Your gas didn't just keep us awake. It opened our eyes to possibilities you cannot imagine." The final entry in Private Dmitry Volkov's journal was written in a shaking hand. March 13th, 1947, 0400 hours. It's over. The subjects are dead. Dr. V shot the last one himself when it wouldn't stop talking, wouldn't stop explaining what they had become. But before it died, it looked directly at me and smiled. "The gas remains," it whispered. "The knowledge remains. What we learned in that chamber cannot be unlearned. Dr. V has ordered the complete destruction of all research materials, but I saw him talking to his assistant before I left. Something about preserving samples for future reference. I found a sealed envelope in my locker tonight, marked, 'Do not open. State security classification maximum.' I don't know what's inside, but I can guess. This isn't over. It's just the beginning." March 15th, 1947, final entry. "I'm leaving this journal with my belongings before I disappear. Let whoever finds it know the truth about Facility 47B. Dr. V was right about one thing: they had discovered something revolutionary. But some discoveries should remain buried. I've heard rumors that small samples of the gas and tissue from the subjects were secretly preserved and transferred to other facilities. If that's true, then God help us all. What we created in that chamber wasn't just an experiment. It was evolution in its most terrifying form. And evolution never stops." The official records of Research Facility 47B were sealed and classified beyond the highest levels of Soviet security clearance. The building was demolished 6 months later, its concrete foundation filled with tons of radioactive waste to ensure nothing could ever grow there again. The staff were reassigned to distant posts, their memories of the experiment officially classified as state secrets. But secrets have a way of surviving, even when those who keep them do not. Private Dmitry Volkov's journal was discovered in 1993, hidden in a safety deposit box in a Moscow bank. Along with the journal was a single photograph. 5 men in a concrete chamber, their faces turned toward the camera, their eyes reflecting the photographer's flash like mirrors. And sealed in a small glass vial at the bottom of the box was a quantity of colorless, odorless gas, enough for perhaps one more experiment, should someone be curious enough to repeat the work of Dr. Sergei Volkov. The question that haunts researchers today is not whether the Russian sleep experiment actually occurred, but whether it ever truly ended. In the depths of classified government facilities around the world, behind sealed doors marked with biohazard warnings, there may still be those who remember the lessons learned in that Siberian laboratory. After all, as the last subject said before his death, "The knowledge remains. What we learned in that chamber cannot be unlearned." And somewhere in the world, in the basement of a forgotten building or the depths of a classified research facility, that knowledge may be waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to rediscover it. The Russian sleep experiment is officially denied by all government agencies. No documentation exists in any public archive. No researcher will acknowledge its existence. But on quiet nights, in the research facilities where the boundaries of human endurance are still being tested, some say you can still hear the echo of 5 voices, laughing in perfect harmony at the wonderful joke they discovered in their month without sleep. The joke that none of us are ready to understand. Not yet.